The sky above Washington, D.C. was split by unnatural light. A vessel, massive enough to cast a shadow over the entire city, loomed in orbit, its sleek, obsidian hull swallowing the sun. Across every screen and frequency, a single voice, calm, authoritative, and utterly alien, delivered its decree. The Terran species will submit to the dominion of the Hekari Empire. Resistance is unwise. Compliance will ensure continued existence. In the Pentagon's war room, Captain Mason Briggs leaned against the metal table, arms crossed, jaw clenched tight. Around him, the last of the United States' top military brass gathered, though their authority had diminished the moment that ship arrived. His team, men he trusted with his life, stood a step behind him, their presence a silent confirmation that if it came down to a fight, they were ready. A figure shimmered into existence in the center of the room. The hologram projected a being draped in flowing, iridescent robes, its elongated skull crowned with ridges of bioluminescent tissue. Piercing silver eyes swept across the humans with the casual disdain of a god observing insects. "I am Overlord Jerex of the Hekari Council. We recognize your kind as a lesser species. Yet the protocols of conquest require this formality. Kneel, relinquish all authority, and serve." The silence was suffocating. Then Briggs spoke. "Yeah, and if we don't?" Jerex studied him, the glow of his skull pulsing as though amused. "Your defiance is quaint. Your civilization's highest weapons are powerless before our shields. Your war machines are obsolete. We have calculated a 99.8% probability of your immediate defeat. There is no strategic value in resistance." Briggs let out a slow breath. "Then why are you here? If it's that easy, why not just take what you want?" Jerex's expression remained unreadable. "We have no need for bloodshed. We prefer efficient subjugation. The resources of your world are of greater value than its inhabitants." Briggs turned slightly, meeting the eyes of Lieutenant Carter. The engineer gave a subtle nod, already absorbing every detail of the alien's words. Sergeant O'Reilly, arms folded like iron bars, exhaled sharply through his nose. Vasquez and Simmons flanked the room's edges, silent but coiled like wolves awaiting the signal to strike. Briggs smirked. "Well, we appreciate the offer, but the answer's no." The Hekari overlord tilted his head, as if contemplating an incomprehensible anomaly. "Then you choose annihilation." The lights flickered. A sudden, deep tremor rolled through the building, rattling steel beams. Reports screamed through the command center speakers, targets obliterated in coordinated strikes, air bases leveled, the Atlantic fleet gone, cities across the globe reduced to craters, their ashes still settling. The invasion had begun. Jerex did not move. "This demonstration was but a fraction of our power. Submit now, and no more shall die." Briggs clenched his fists. "We don't kneel." The overlord exhaled, a strange, static-filled sigh. "Then perish." The hologram blinked out. Alarms blared. Across the table, a three-dimensional display of Earth lit up, with spreading destruction. Red markers flooded the map, detailing incoming warships and planetary bombardments. "Jesus," Simmons muttered, staring at the display. O'Reilly cracked his knuckles. "Figures a bunch of galaxy-brained squid heads would think we'd roll over just 'cause they said so." Briggs ignored the chatter. "Carter, tell me you caught something useful." The lieutenant's mind was already working at full speed. "Their shields." He kept bringing them up, almost like they're a guarantee. "That's not how real invincibility works." Vasquez scoffed. "Yeah, well, invincible enough looks like it's kicking our ass right now." Carter shook his head. "No. Everything they've shown us, energy weapons, precision strikes, shielded war machines, it's all geared toward one thing. Complete dominance with minimum resistance. But shields have rules. Every defense has a crack if you know where to hit it." Briggs nodded. "Then we find it." A second impact rocked the building, this time closer. A warning klaxon blared, signaling an incoming orbital strike. The Pentagon was no longer safe. "Move," Briggs barked. They ran, through war-torn corridors, past officers desperately issuing last-minute commands. The exit led to a reinforced hangar, where a remaining Black Hawk helicopter idled, blades already spinning. The pilot, a man they hadn't met but trusted implicitly by the urgency in his eyes, motioned them in. The moment they lifted off, fire rained from the sky. The Pentagon, headquarters of the most powerful military Earth had ever known, was engulfed in a white-hot explosion. The shock wave battered them, but the Black Hawk surged forward, carrying the last resistance leaders away from the ashes. No one spoke for a long time. The world below them burned, but Briggs' mind was already focused on what came next. He glanced at Carter. "We need weapons." The lieutenant nodded. "Then we go old school." Briggs allowed himself a small, grim smile. The aliens thought they had humanity figured out, but they'd just made their first mistake, giving mankind a reason to fight. And when humans fought, they didn't stop. Briggs' Black Hawk tore through the fractured skies, the world below them a burning canvas of destruction. Earth was on fire, fires that swallowed entire cities, swept across farmlands, and darkened once pristine oceans. The Empire's invasion had begun with brutal efficiency, crushing humanity's fragile defenses like an afterthought. Yet in the heart of this chaos, a glimmer of hope ignited. There was something vital, that the Heckery had overlooked. The helicopter dipped low, narrowly avoiding a barrage of incoming fire from one of the Empire's relentless orbital cannons. O'Reilly gripped the frame, eyes steely, jaw tight. "I hate being the underdog." Vasquez was uncharacteristically silent, his hands clenched into fists as if his entire body was a wound waiting to strike. "We've got to hit M where it hurts. Find their weak spot." Lieutenant Carter, sitting next to Briggs, was staring at a handheld tablet, eyes wide. "There's a munitions depot not far from here, Captain. Old stockpiles. Stuff we used before the New Age weapons took over. It's long forgotten, but if there's anything left, it's our best shot at fighting back." Briggs scanned the horizon, eyes flicking between the chaos below and the data Carter was feeding him. Their mission was clear: find something to counter the overwhelming might of the Heckery war machines. The aliens had assumed humanity was helpless against their superior technology. It was time to prove them wrong. The helicopter touched down with a jarring thud in an abandoned military compound. The place was silent, eerie, like a tomb waiting to be disturbed. The team filed out, their weapons at the ready. For a moment, they stood there, breathing in the stillness, before moving toward the rusty doors of an old warehouse. Briggs led the way, his steps deliberate. The others followed, but their faces told stories of doubt. It was hard to imagine that something from Earth's past could turn the tide against the technologically superior invaders. "Anything in there?" O'Reilly asked, voice low. Carter peered through the grime-smeared windows. "There's something. It's an old weapons depot. If we're lucky, we'll find something useful." The doors creaked open, revealing rows upon rows of decaying crates, some marked with faded labels of weaponry long past its prime. Dust hung thick in the air as the team moved through the dimly lit space. The silence was broken only by their footsteps, the occasional groan of rusted metal, and the hum of a distant generator. "Old grenades, some rockets," Vasquez muttered, pulling a rusted launcher from a shelf. "Not much, but we could work with it." He slung the launcher over his shoulder, already considering how to modify it for their needs. "Focus," Briggs commanded. "We're looking for something bigger, something with teeth." A clang sounded from the far corner, and Carter quickly jogged over, his eyes scanning the contents of a worn crate. "This is it," he said, voice tinged with disbelief. M203 grenade launchers, the real deal. These things were retired after we switched to plasma rifles, but they're still effective. Briggs approached, his gaze sharp. The grenade launchers were old, their paint chipped, but they had a raw, almost primal quality to them, exactly the kind of tool they needed. "We'll take every one of them." The rest of the team began to load up. It was the first time in days that Briggs saw a flicker of hope in their eyes, a sense of purpose returning to their weary souls. The Heckery believed that humanity was nothing more than a blip, a species to be snuffed out without effort. But this was the beginning of their mistake. "You think this'll work?" O'Reilly asked as he hefted a launcher, testing its weight. "A bunch of ancient grenades." Carter looked up, eyes narrowing in thought. If their shields are as advanced as we think, this could be the perfect counter. The Hekari rely on high-frequency energy fields to block energy weapons. But a grenade? Slow-moving kinetic? That's something their shields weren't designed to handle. He paused, eyes flicking between the men. If we hit them in the right spot, we can take one down. We'll need precision, Briggs said, voice low. We won't get a second shot at this. Vasquez loaded his launcher with a grunt. Precision, huh? Then let's make sure we hit them hard. The plan was simple, if not suicidal. They would track the Hekari's movements using old military satellites still operational in the system. Once they had the coordinates of one of the Empire's walkers, they would hit it fast and hard. The grenade launchers would be their weapon of choice. Something slow enough to slip through the invaders' defenses, but powerful enough to crack their armor. Simmons had his doubts. We're going to rely on these old things. What if they just step on us? Briggs looked him dead in the eye. Then we die knowing we made them bleed. For a moment, the team was still, contemplating the gravity of what they were about to do. The odds were stacked against them, impossibly so. The Hekari's war machines were vast, their shields impenetrable, and their weapons devastating. But something within the men of this group, something deeply human, stirred. They would not go down without a fight. As the team loaded up the helicopter with their newly acquired weapons, Carter worked feverishly on a crude targeting system using an old map and a satellite uplink. It wasn't much, but it was enough to guide them. Minutes later, they were airborne again, skimming across the desolate landscape toward the first target, an Hekari walker. Its towering form was like a living monolith, a symbol of the Empire's unfathomable might. But as they approached, the men tightened their grips on their weapons. They would not be cowed by its size or technology. The helicopter swooped low, and for the first time in days, Briggs felt a surge of confidence. The Hekari had underestimated them, and now they would learn that the true power of humanity lay not in the technology it wielded, but in the unwavering resolve of its people. Get ready, Briggs muttered. We're going to show them that Earth still has a hell of a bite. The first grenade launcher fired. It flew slow, but steady, a blur of deadly intent in the air. The walker turned toward them, its shields flickering to life. But it was too late. And then, with a deafening explosion, the Empire's Invincible machine shook. The first shot had landed. The explosion rippled through the air like the first crack in a dam, sending shockwaves that shook the ground beneath them. The Hekari walker, a towering, hulking beast of advanced technology, staggered, its massive body swaying as its shield flickered. The soldiers in the Black Hawk held their breath, watching as the enemy machine reeled, its armor buckling slightly from the force of the grenade strike. Briggs' eyes narrowed, heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't a fatal blow, not yet, but it was enough to show the aliens that they weren't invincible. Hit it again, he barked, voice hard. Carter quickly adjusted the targeting system on the side of the helicopter, his fingers flying over the worn buttons. I'm locking in another shot. Just hold steady. Simmons gritted his teeth. Another shot. We're lucky the first one worked. What if? Do it, Briggs interrupted. There was no room for hesitation now. They were committed. The Black Hawk pivoted, banking hard to the left as the second grenade launcher fired, its arc cutting through the air like a comet of vengeance. The Hekari machine, already destabilized, could only watch as the round found its mark, striking the weak spot near its power core. The resulting explosion was smaller but no less devastating. The walker staggered, smoke pouring from its joints and vents as sparks and fire began to eat through its armor. The alien war machine collapsed to the ground with a deafening crash. Hell yeah! O'Reilly shouted, slamming his fist against the side of the helicopter. But Carter's voice was a low murmur, laced with uncertainty. It's still standing. It's still got power. Briggs clenched his jaw. Not for long. The battle had only just begun. As the Black Hawk zoomed toward the horizon, the team knew the aliens would soon figure out what had happened. They had exposed a crack in the Hekari's seemingly impenetrable wall, but the Alien Council wouldn't let it stand. Their next move would be swift and brutal, and Briggs had no illusions about the challenge ahead. I'm patching into the satellite network, Carter said, his fingers dancing over the device again. We need to know where the next target is. If we can take down one more walker, we might have a chance to push them back. Then let's make it count, Briggs replied, staring out at the battlefield below. He could feel the weight of history pressing on him. Humanity was at the brink of extinction, and yet it felt like something primal had awakened within them. They had nothing left to lose. The Black Hawk banked sharply as Carter's screen flashed. Got it. Another one. About 10 clicks northeast, near the old industrial zone. Briggs turned to his team. You all know what to do. We hit them with everything we've got. No more playing nice. They arrived at the industrial zone in under 10 minutes, skimming over the broken landscape. The once thriving heart of Earth's manufacturing now lay in ruins, a perfect backdrop for another fight to the death. The Heckory Walker stood tall, its hulking form silhouetted against the burning sky, a testament to the Empire's overwhelming force. This time, though, it wasn't alone, for others flanked it, their immense forms casting long shadows as they patrolled the perimeter. 5 of them, O'Reilly muttered, his eyes narrowing. This is going to be messy. We don't have the luxury of choice, Briggs said. The plan stays the same. We target the weak spots and hit them hard. Carter, guide us in. Carter's fingers were already flying over the system's interface, locking in targets. We'll go for the lead walker first, hit the others after. I'm marking their vulnerable points. Just don't miss. The Black Hawk dove low, narrowly avoiding the artillery fire that the walkers sent their way. The lead walker's shield shimmered, responding to the threat. It was fast, far faster than anything Briggs had ever seen. The first grenade launcher fired, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch. The round flew with deadly precision, and then, boom! The explosion struck the walker's power core, sending the machine lurching backward as the shield flickered violently. The immense machine buckled, then fell, but not before firing a volley of devastating plasma bolts into the air, scorching the ground below. Got one, Vasquez shouted, his voice triumphant, but short-lived. Briggs gritted his teeth. Focus. We've got 4 more. Simmons' voice crackled through the comms, urgency sharp. We've got incoming. Looks like reinforcements. We need to move now. The horizon lit up with streaks of alien plasma fire as new reinforcements descended. The Heckory were adapting faster than they anticipated, and the Resistance had only one shot left to take control of the battlefield. Briggs snapped to attention, his mind calculating rapidly. The grenades were effective, but the Heckory weren't going to give them the chance to keep targeting those weak spots. The next few minutes would decide everything. We can't keep doing this in the open. We need to draw them in, create a choke point. He turned to Carter. You said there were old defenses here, right? Carter's brow furrowed. Yeah, some underground tunnels. If we can get there, we might be able to use them for cover and launch from a concealed position. Briggs didn't need any more convincing. Lead the way. The rest of us will keep the walkers distracted. The Black Hawk roared back into the fray, streaking across the horizon as the men aboard prepared for the next stage of their gambit. The walkers were closing in, their massive forms cutting through the smoke and fire like unstoppable forces of nature. The only hope they had left was to outsmart them. Vasquez grinned grimly, reloading his launcher. Let's give them hell, boys. They dove into the chaos, each one knowing that they were at the edge of something bigger than any of them had imagined. The Heckory had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to fight with everything it had. The next phase of their war would begin beneath the ground, in the forgotten spaces where Earth's last soldiers would rise again. But as the men moved deeper into the shadows, they all felt it, the pressure of what lay ahead. The Heckory would not let them win easily, and if the Resistance had any chance of succeeding, they would need more than just old grenades and cunning tactics. They would need to learn, to evolve, and to fight smarter than the invaders ever imagined. Briggs' eyes hardened as he stared at the incoming walkers. Let's show them who they're really dealing with. The underground tunnels were a maze of rusted metal and forgotten technology, a relic from a time when the world had still believed in its own invincibility. Now the men of the last human resistance moved through them like ghosts, guided only by the faint glow of Carter's handheld device. The Black Hawk had dropped them near a long-abandoned airstrip where they'd taken refuge in the tunnels to regroup. The walkers were still out there, but their focus had shifted. The grenade strikes had sent a message, but the Heckery weren't so easily deterred. Briggs led the way, his footsteps deliberate. His mind raced with strategy. The grenades had been a good start, an unexpected surprise, maybe even a lucky shot. But luck wouldn't win the war. They needed something more, something to keep the Heckery off balance long enough to turn the tide. Carter, now back to his role as the team's tech specialist, adjusted his comm system. I've patched into the old military grids. There's a weapons cache down here, near the old command center. We might find something worth using. Lead the way, Briggs said, his voice steady but edged with urgency. He felt the weight of every second, every breath that took them closer to an uncertain confrontation. The Heckery were relentless, but humanity had its strengths. They had ingenuity, adaptability, and a drive that no alien empire could predict. O'Reilly kept glancing at his watch, the ticking sound louder than ever in the silence of the tunnels. How long till they catch on? He muttered. You know they're not going to let us sit here and regroup. They'll come for us eventually, Briggs replied, his tone unyielding. But we're not going to wait for them. Vasquez, his launcher slung over his back, walked beside Simmons, who was quietly checking his rifle. How long before we're out of grenades? Vasquez asked, his voice low. Long enough, Briggs said, though the doubt in his voice betrayed the confidence he was trying to project. Long enough to make it count. They reached the cache sooner than expected. It wasn't much, old ammunition, a few more grenades, and some experimental tech they didn't fully understand. But it was enough to make a difference. Carter began to work quickly, trying to rig the equipment into something that could take down the remaining walkers. Time was running out. We need a distraction, Carter said as he examined an old EMP device. Something to pull them off our scent. Leave that to us, O'Reilly said, grinning. He didn't wait for a response before heading out into the open, eager to take the fight to the enemy. Briggs watched him go, heart in his throat. The plan was risky, too risky, but it was their best shot. Stay on comms, he ordered. If anything goes wrong, we fall back to the tunnels. Understood. A chorus of affirmatives came back, and Briggs turned his attention to the task at hand. Carter was working fast, hands moving with a sense of purpose that belied the chaos outside. The rest of the team stood ready, weapons primed, waiting for the signal. It felt like the calm before a storm, each passing second heavy with the anticipation of battle. The seconds stretched into minutes, and just as the tension in the air reached its peak, O'Reilly's voice crackled through the comms, sharp with adrenaline. Here they come. Get ready. Briggs exchanged a glance with his team. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back. The sky above them darkened as the alien war machines appeared, their massive forms silhouetted against the dying light of the day. The walkers were flanked by smaller craft, hovering vehicles that darted around like vultures, searching for prey. Their sensors had already picked up O'Reilly's presence, and now they were closing in. Briggs clenched his fists, his mind running through the plan one last time. The walkers would move toward O'Reilly's location, drawn by the decoy he'd set up. Meanwhile, the rest of the team would use the tunnels to move into position. They had one shot at this, and the clock was ticking. A low rumble shook the ground beneath them. O'Reilly's voice came over the comms again, distorted by static. Here we go. Let's see if this thing still works. The walkers began their march, their movement slow but deliberate. The ground seemed to tremble with each step, the air thick with the sound of their approaching footsteps. Briggs motioned for his team to move. They slipped into the tunnels, their movements quick and quiet. Every step felt like it could be their last, but there was no time for fear. They had to act now, or they would never get another chance. Carter was already setting up the EMP device, his fingers flying over the controls. I'm almost ready. Just need a few more seconds. Make it fast, Briggs growled. We're out of time. Above them, the sound of the walkers grew louder, their massive forms looming closer. The rest of the team stood ready, weapons aimed at the tunnel entrance, waiting for the signal. They had no illusions about what would happen if they failed. The Heckery would destroy them, and humanity's last hope would be gone. But they weren't going to fail. Not today. The EMP device hummed to life, and for a moment, all was still. Then, a pulse of energy shot through the air, sending a ripple through the atmosphere. The walker's shields flickered, and for the first time, the invincible machines seemed vulnerable. Now, Briggs shouted, and the team exploded into action. Vasquez fired first, the grenade launcher roaring as it sent a payload of explosives toward the nearest walker. The blast rocked the machine, sending it reeling, its shield sputtering and failing. Simmons fired next, his rifle punching holes into the exposed armor. The walker staggered again, its movements becoming sluggish, uncertain. But the remaining walkers weren't finished. They turned toward the team, their weapons locking on to the human resistance with deadly intent. Briggs cursed, taking aim at the nearest walker. Hit them now while they're vulnerable. The grenades kept coming, each one finding its mark, each explosion making the once mighty walkers falter. The EMP had worked. The walkers were no longer invincible. Then, with a roar that shook the earth, the final walker fell. It hit the ground with a deafening crash, its systems fried beyond repair. For a moment, all was silent. Briggs stood still, staring at the fallen machine. The impossible had happened. The tide had turned. But as the dust settled, he knew this was only the beginning. The Hecari Empire would not forgive this defeat. They would be back. But now humanity had a chance, and they would fight until the last breath.